In the glittering world of British royalty, where every jewel tells a story and every gesture carries centuries of meaning, there exists a silent war that the public rarely sees. Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, beneath the crystal chandeliers and velvet curtains, a battle wages on. It is not fought with swords or armies, but with tiaras, with seating arrangements, with the subtle art of who wears what and when. And, at the center of this quiet storm stands two women, both destined to be queens in their own right, both fighting for their place in history. One has waited decades for her crown. The other has captured the hearts of a nation in mere years. When Princess Catherine appeared at a state banquet wearing the most treasured tiara in the royal collection, the one that Queen Camilla had dreamed of wearing for over 20 years, she ignited a fury that would shake the very foundations of the House of Windsor. This is the story of envy, ambition, and the dangerous game of royal politics. This is the story of two women, one crown, and a tiara that changed everything. The morning of November 15th began like any other at Kensington Palace. The autumn sun filtered through the tall windows of the apartment where Prince William and Princess Catherine lived with their 3 children. The leaves outside had turned golden and red, carpeting the private gardens in colors that matched the warmth inside the home. Catherine had woken early, as she always did, to help the children prepare for their school day. Prince George, now growing into a thoughtful young man, had his breakfast quietly while reading a book about marine life. Princess Charlotte chatted excitedly about an upcoming school play, and little Prince Louis demanded attention with his endless energy and mischievous smile. William had left early for a meeting at Clarence's house, leaving Catherine to manage the morning routine. She moved through the tasks with practiced ease, her bare feet patting softly on the polished floors as she packed lunches and checked homework folders. To anyone watching, she was simply a mother doing what mothers do. There was no hint of the royal drama that would soon consume her day. It was just after 9 in the morning when Catherine's private secretary, a efficient woman named Eleanor, knocked on the door of her study. Catherine had just settled into her desk with a cup of tea, preparing to review her schedule for the coming week. Eleanor's face carried an expression that Catherine had learned to recognize over the years. It was the look that said something unexpected had happened, something that required immediate attention. Eleanor placed a folder on the desk, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was an official communication from the office of the king, stamped with the royal seal and marked as urgent. Catherine opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the elegant handwriting. As she read, her tea grew cold in its cup, forgotten. The letter informed her that she had been selected to wear the Grand Duchess Vladimir tiara at the upcoming state banquet for the visiting President of France. The tiara, one of the most magnificent pieces in the royal collection, had been a favorite of Queen Elizabeth II. It was a stunning piece of craftsmanship, featuring 15 interlocking diamond circles, each containing either a pearl or an emerald drop that could be changed depending on the occasion. The tiara had a history as rich as its appearance, having been smuggled out of Russia during the Revolution and eventually purchased by Queen Mary. Catherine read the letter twice, then a third time. She understood immediately the significance of this gesture. King Charles was making a statement. By choosing her to wear this particular tiara, he was signaling to the world that Catherine held a special place in the future of the monarchy. It was an honor that went beyond mere jewelry. It was about legacy, about trust, about the passing of power from one generation to the next. What Catherine did not know, what she could not have known in that quiet moment in her study, was that the letter had caused an explosion of fury just a few miles away at Clarence's house, where Queen Camilla had received her own communication about the state banquet arrangements. Camilla had been expecting this banquet for months. The French president's visit was one of the most important diplomatic events of the year, and she had already begun planning her outfit with her dressmaker. She had assumed, as she had assumed for years, that she would wear the Grand Duchess Vladimir tiara. After all, she was the queen consort. She had waited her entire adult life for this position, had endured decades of public scorn and media attacks, had watched from the shadows as Princess Diana captured the world's heart while she remained the other woman in the eyes of millions. Now, finally, she had her crown. She had her title. She had her place beside the king. And, yet, even now, even after everything she had survived, she was being passed over. The tiara she coveted, the one she had dreamed of wearing since the first time she saw Queen Elizabeth don it at a state banquet decades ago, was being given to Catherine. The Queen's private secretary had delivered the news personally, his voice careful and measured as he explained the king's decision. Camilla had listened in silence, her face a mask of royal composure that revealed nothing of the storm brewing beneath. She had nodded, thanked him for the information, and asked to be left alone. The moment the door closed behind him, the mask cracked. Camilla stood at the window of her private sitting room, her hands shaking with a rage she could barely contain. Through the glass, she could see the perfectly manicured gardens of Clarence House, the same gardens where she had walked with Charles in the early days of their forbidden love, when the whole world seemed against them. She had sacrificed so much for this life. She had endured so much criticism, so much hatred, so much public humiliation. And, now, when she should finally be enjoying the fruits of her patience, she was being overshadowed by a woman half her age. Catherine. Always Catherine. The perfect princess with her perfect hair and her perfect smile and her perfect children. The woman who had never had to fight for her place, who had simply appeared one day at a university party and captured the heart of the heir to the throne. The woman who had never known what it meant to be reviled, to be called names in the tabloids, to have crowds boo her in the streets. Camilla turned away from the window and reached for her phone. She dialed a number she knew by heart, the number of her oldest and most trusted confidant, a woman who had been by her side through every scandal and every triumph. "Have you heard?" Camilla's voice was steady, but there was a coldness in it that her friend recognized immediately. "I just saw the news," came the reply. "The palace announced the tiara assignment an hour ago. It's all over the papers already." Camilla closed her eyes. Of course it was. The palace press office, in their infinite wisdom, had decided to make the announcement public. Now the whole world knew. Now everyone would see that Catherine had been chosen over her, that the king's daughter-in-law had been given precedence over his own wife. "This is Charles's doing," Camilla said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "He's trying to boost her image. Ever since her illness, he's been obsessed with showing the public how much the family supports her. But this is too much. This is my position, my right." Her friend listened sympathetically, offering the kind of comfort that only comes from years of friendship. But, even as Camilla vented her frustration, a plan was beginning to form in her mind. She had not survived this long in the royal world by accepting defeat gracefully. She had learned, over decades of navigating the treacherous waters of court politics, that there were ways to fight back that left no fingerprints. The state banquet was still 3 weeks away. 3 weeks was a long time in the world of royal intrigue. Many things could happen in 3 weeks. Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, Catherine was trying to process her own complicated feelings about the honor she had received. She sat in her study, the letter still in her hands, thinking about what it would mean to wear a tiara that had so often graced the head of Queen Elizabeth. Catherine had loved the late Queen deeply. Elizabeth had been more than a grandmother-in-law to her. She had been a mentor, a guide, a steady presence in a world that often felt overwhelming. In the early days of her marriage to William, when Catherine was still learning to navigate the pressures of royal life, Elizabeth had taken her under her wing. They had shared private teas at Windsor Castle, conversations about everything from the challenges of motherhood to the weight of public duty. Elizabeth had taught Catherine that being royal was not about the jewels or the palaces or the titles. It was about service. It was about putting the needs of the country above your own desires. Catherine remembered a conversation they had shared just a year before Elizabeth's passing. They had been sitting in the Queen's private garden at Balmoral, watching the children play on the lawn. Elizabeth had turned to her with those wise, knowing eyes and said something that Catherine would never forget. "When I am gone," the Queen had said, "there will be those who try to change things. There will be those who forget what this institution is truly about. But I am trusting you, Catherine, to remember. I am trusting you to keep the flame alive." At the time, Catherine had not fully understood what the Queen meant. Now, as she held the letter announcing her selection to wear Elizabeth's beloved tiara, she thought perhaps she was beginning to understand. But Catherine was no fool. She knew that this honor would come with complications. She knew that Camilla would be hurt, perhaps even angry. She knew that the tabloids would turn this into a story about royal rivalry, about competition between the two women, about everything except what it actually was: a gift from a king to his daughter-in-law, a gesture of support and affection. Catherine reached for her phone and called William. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm with affection. "Have you seen the letter?" she asked. "I have," William replied. "Papa told me last night. He wanted to make sure you knew it was his decision entirely, that he chose you because he believes you represent the future of this family." "And Camilla?" Catherine asked carefully. "How is she taking it?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that spoke volumes. "Papa says she understands," William finally said. "But, you know Camilla. She has never been good at hiding her feelings, even when she thinks she is." Catherine nodded, even though William could not see her. She understood all too well. She had watched Camilla at family gatherings, had seen the way the older woman's smile would tighten when attention shifted away from her. She had noticed the subtle jabs in conversation, the comments that seemed innocent but carried an edge. Camilla was not a bad person, Catherine believed. She was simply a woman who had waited too long for something and now clutched at it with desperate hands. "I'll speak with her," Catherine said. "Before the banquet. I want her to know that this is not a competition. I want her to know that I respect her position." William sighed. "That's very generous of you, darling. But, be careful. Camilla has been through a lot, and sometimes people who have suffered don't know how to accept kindness. They see it as weakness, as an opportunity." Catherine thanked her husband and ended the call. She sat for a long moment in the quiet of her study, thinking about the path ahead. She had 3 weeks to prepare for a state banquet that would be watched by millions around the world. 3 weeks to learn the history of a tiara that carried the weight of generations. 3 weeks to navigate the treacherous waters of royal politics while maintaining the grace and dignity that had made her the most beloved royal of her generation. What she did not know was that Camilla was already making plans of her own. At Clarence House, the Queen Consort had spent the morning on the phone with various allies within the palace structure. Camilla had learned over the years that power in the royal household was not concentrated in any one person. It was distributed among a complex network of secretaries, advisors, schedulers, and staff members who controlled the flow of information and access. If you wanted to influence outcomes, you needed to cultivate relationships with these people. You needed to understand what they wanted and find ways to give it to them. Camilla's first call was to the master of the royal household, a man named Geoffrey Blackwood who had served in the palace for over 30 years. Geoffrey was old school, a traditionalist who believed that the monarchy should maintain strict hierarchies and protocols. He had never been comfortable with the informality that William and Catherine brought to their public engagements. He preferred the stiff formality of previous generations, the clear lines of precedence that left no room for ambiguity. "Geoffrey," Camilla said, her voice honeyed with false warmth, "I was hoping you might be able to help me with a small matter regarding the state banquet." Geoffrey listened as Camilla explained her concerns. She did not mention the tiara directly. She was too clever for that. Instead, she talked about protocol, about tradition, about the importance of maintaining proper precedence at state functions. She wondered aloud whether it was appropriate for the Princess of Wales to be seated quite so prominently at the dinner, whether perhaps the seating arrangements might be adjusted to better reflect the hierarchy of the royal family. Geoffrey was sympathetic. He had always felt that Queen Camilla did not receive the respect her position deserved. He agreed to look into the matter and report back. Camilla's second call was to her dressmaker, a legendary designer who had been creating gowns for the royal family for decades. This call was more straightforward. Camilla wanted a dress for the state banquet that would command attention. She wanted something spectacular, something that would ensure all eyes were on her regardless of what tiara Catherine might be wearing. The dressmaker understood immediately. She promised to create something extraordinary, a gown that would be talked about for years to come. Camilla smiled as she hung up the phone. If she could not compete with Catherine's tiara, she would compete with everything else. But Camilla's most important call was to someone outside the palace entirely. It was to a journalist, a woman who wrote a gossip column for one of the most widely read tabloids in Britain. Camilla and this journalist had an arrangement that went back many years. The journalist received exclusive tips about royal events, and, in return, she ensured that her coverage of Camilla was always favorable. "I have a story for you," Camilla said, her voice low. "But you did not hear it from me." The journalist listened eagerly as Camilla shared details about the tiara situation. She framed it carefully, presenting herself as the victim of palace politics, as a queen who was being overshadowed by her daughter-in-law through no fault of her own. She hinted at tensions within the family, at jealousies and rivalries that simmered beneath the surface. She gave just enough information to create a compelling narrative without revealing anything that could be traced back to her. By the time Camilla hung up the phone, she felt slightly better. She had set wheels in motion. She had planted seeds that would bloom in the coming days and weeks. She had begun to fight back. But Camilla underestimated two things. First, she underestimated the depth of King Charles's commitment to Catherine. Charles had watched his daughter-in-law battle serious illness with dignity and grace. He had seen her return to public duties despite her health challenges, never complaining, never seeking sympathy, simply doing her job with the same dedication she had always shown. He believed, truly believed, that Catherine represented the best of what the monarchy could be. And he was determined to support her, even if it meant disappointing his wife. Second, Camilla underestimated Catherine herself. The Princess of Wales had not survived a decade in the royal family by being naive. She had learned to read people, to understand motivations, to anticipate problems before they arose. And she had a network of her own within the palace, people who were loyal to her because she had treated them with kindness and respect over the years. Within hours of Camilla's phone calls, Catherine knew exactly what was happening. One of her own allies in the household had overheard Geoffrey Blackwood discussing the seating arrangements. Another had noticed the unusual activity in the Queen's office, the flurry of calls and meetings that seemed out of proportion to a routine day. Catherine did not panic. She did not confront Camilla or complain to William or seek sympathy from anyone. Instead, she did what she had always done when faced with challenges. She sat quietly, she thought carefully, and she made a plan. The first thing Catherine did was reach out to King Charles directly. She called his private number and asked if they might have tea together that afternoon. Charles agreed immediately, pleased by the invitation. His relationship with Catherine had always been warm, but it had deepened significantly during her illness. He had visited her during her recovery, had sent handwritten notes of encouragement, had shown a tenderness that surprised even those closest to him. They met in Charles's private study at Clarence House, surrounded by his paintings and books and the comfortable clutter of a man who valued his personal space. Catherine came prepared. She thanked him sincerely for the honor of wearing the tiara. She spoke movingly about what it meant to her to wear something that had been so dear to Queen Elizabeth. And then, carefully, she raised the subject of Camilla. "I know this must be difficult for her," Catherine said gently. "She has waited so long for her position, and I worry that my wearing this tiara might be seen as a slight. I want you to know that I would never want to cause division in our family. If there is any way to honor both of us at this event, I would support that completely." Charles was touched by her grace. He had expected Catherine to be pleased about the tiara, perhaps even triumphant. Instead, she was thinking about Camilla's feelings, about family harmony, about the greater good. It reinforced everything he believed about her character. "The decision was mine," Charles said firmly. "I chose you because I believe you will honor Elizabeth's memory. But I appreciate your concern for Camilla, and I will speak with her myself. This is not about competition. This is about celebrating the best of our family." Catherine left Clarence House feeling cautiously optimistic. She had done what she could to smooth the waters. Now she would wait and see how events unfolded. What she did not expect was for the story to explode in the press the very next day. The tabloid article appeared on newsstands across Britain with a headline that screamed of royal drama. It spoke of tensions between the Queen and the Princess of Wales, of jealousy over tiaras, of a family at war with itself. The journalist had done exactly what Camilla had hoped, spinning the story in a way that painted Catherine as the interloper, the young pretender who was pushing aside the rightful queen. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media erupted with opinions on both sides. Some supported Camilla, arguing that she deserved respect as the queen consort. Others rallied behind Catherine, calling her the true jewel of the royal family. The story dominated news cycles for days, forcing the palace to issue a carefully worded statement that denied any conflict while doing nothing to address the underlying tensions. Catherine watched the coverage from her study at Kensington Palace, her heart heavy. This was exactly what she had hoped to avoid. This public spectacle, this entertainment for the masses at the expense of family unity. She knew that Camilla was behind the leak, even if she could not prove it. She knew that this was the older woman's way of fighting back. But Catherine also knew something that Camilla did not. She knew that in the court of public opinion, the truth eventually wins. She knew that the British people had seen her dedication, her grace, her commitment to service over many years. She knew that no tabloid story could change what they knew in their hearts. And so Catherine did something unexpected. She did nothing at all. She went about her duties as usual. She attended her scheduled engagements with her signature smile and her genuine warmth. She played with her children, supported her husband, visited her charities. She refused to engage with the controversy, refused to give interviews, refused to defend herself publicly. It was a strategy that confused her critics and impressed her supporters. In a world where everyone seemed to have an opinion and felt compelled to share it loudly, Catherine's silence was revolutionary. It spoke of confidence, of inner peace, of a woman who knew her own worth and did not need validation from tabloids or social media. As the days passed and the state banquet drew closer, the public narrative began to shift. People started asking why Catherine was being criticized for accepting an honor from the king. They began to question the motives behind the original story. They began to see Camilla's silence not as dignified restraint but as suspicious absence. The tide was turning, and Camilla could feel it. In her private chambers at Clarence House, the queen consort realized that her plan had backfired. Instead of damaging Catherine's reputation, the leaked story had only strengthened it. Instead of winning sympathy for herself, she had made herself look petty and jealous. The British public, it seemed, had made their choice about which woman they preferred. And the state banquet was still 2 weeks away. Camilla poured herself a glass of wine and stared out the window at the darkening sky. She had underestimated Catherine. She had underestimated the power of grace in the face of attack. But she was not defeated yet. In the game of royal politics, 2 weeks was an eternity. And Camilla had not survived this long by giving up easily. The battle for the tiara was far from over. The morning after the tabloid story broke, Clarence House was in chaos. Phones rang constantly with calls from journalists seeking comment. Staff members rushed through corridors with worried expressions. The press office worked frantically to control the narrative, issuing statements and briefing friendly reporters. At the center of this storm sat Queen Camilla, alone in her private sitting room, sipping tea that had long gone cold. She had not slept well. The excitement she felt after planting the story had given way to unease as she watched Catherine's measured response unfold. The Princess of Wales had said nothing, done nothing, changed nothing about her schedule or her demeanor. It was infuriating. Camilla had expected tears, perhaps a confrontation, certainly some kind of reaction that would prove to the world that Catherine was not as perfect as she appeared. Instead, she had been met with silence so complete it echoed louder than any words could have. Charles had come to speak with her the previous evening. Their conversation had been tense, his disappointment evident in every word. He had not accused her directly of leaking the story. He did not need to. They had been together long enough that words were sometimes unnecessary. He simply looked at her with those sad eyes and asked if there was anything she wanted to tell him. Camilla had denied everything, of course. She was too practiced at deception to crumble at the first sign of suspicion. But she knew that Charles did not believe her, and that knowledge sat heavily in her chest like a stone. Now, as the weak November sunlight filtered through the curtains, Camilla forced herself to think strategically. The leak had been a mistake. She could see that now. It had been born of emotion rather than calculation, of hurt rather than planning. She had wanted to wound Catherine, to tarnish that perfect image that the press could not stop celebrating. Instead, she had wounded herself. But there were still options. The state banquet was 13 days away. The tiara situation could not be changed, that much was clear. Charles would not reverse his decision now, not after the public spectacle. To do so would be to admit that the palace had made a mistake, something the institution never did willingly. The Grand Duchess Vladimir tiara would rest on Catherine's head at the dinner for the French president, and there was nothing Camilla could do about it. What she could do was ensure that she was not forgotten. If Catherine was going to wear the most spectacular tiara in the collection, then Camilla would have to find other ways to command attention. She picked up her phone and called her dressmaker again. "I need to see the designs," she said without preamble. "I need to see them today." The dressmaker agreed to come immediately. She arrived at Clarence's house 2 hours later, carrying a portfolio of sketches that would have made any fashion lover weep with envy. The gown she had designed for Camilla was nothing short of extraordinary. It was a deep emerald green, a color that would complement the queen's complexion beautifully. The bodice was covered in hand-sewn crystals that would catch the light and sparkle like stars. The skirt was full but not overwhelming, allowing movement while still creating a dramatic silhouette. It was a gown fit for a queen, and that was exactly the point. Camilla studied the sketches with a critical eye. She liked what she saw, but something was missing. The dress was beautiful, certainly, but it was not enough. It would not compete with the Vladimir tiara, which was legendary in its magnificence. She needed something more. "What about embellishments?" she asked. "Something unique, something that will make people talk." The dressmaker nodded thoughtfully. "We could add a dramatic train," she suggested. "Something longer than usual. It would require additional attendants to manage, but it would certainly make a statement." Camilla considered this. A long train would indeed draw attention. It would force people to look at her, to make way for her, to acknowledge her presence in a way that went beyond mere protocol. But there was a risk. If the train was too long, too dramatic, it might seem desperate. It might look like she was trying too hard to compete with Catherine, which was exactly what she was doing but could never admit publicly. "Something else," Camilla said. "Something that speaks to history, to tradition. I want people to remember that I am the queen, not just another guest at this dinner." The dressmaker thought for a moment, then her eyes lit up. "What about incorporating elements from Queen Mary's wardrobe? There are several pieces in the royal collection that have not been seen in public for decades. A brooch, perhaps, or a sash. Something that connects you to the previous queens, to the lineage you represent." Now this was interesting. Camilla leaned forward, intrigued. "Tell me more." The conversation continued for another hour as they discussed various historical pieces that might be available for Camilla to wear. By the time the dressmaker left, Camilla felt more optimistic than she had all day. She might not be wearing the Vladimir tiara, but she would be wearing history itself. She would wrap herself in the legacy of queens past, reminding everyone who watched that she belonged in their company. While Camilla plotted her wardrobe strategy, Catherine was dealing with challenges of her own at Kensington Palace. The tabloid coverage had created an avalanche of media interest that required careful management. Her private secretary, Eleanor, had been fielding requests for interviews and statements since dawn. Every major publication wanted a comment, an explanation, a response to the accusations of rivalry with the Queen. Catherine refused them all. She had learned from observing Queen Elizabeth that sometimes the most powerful statement was no statement at all. She would not dignify the gossip with a response. She would not lower herself to participating in the circus that the media wanted to create. Instead, she would focus on her work and trust that the public would see through the manufactured drama. But ignoring the coverage did not mean ignoring the situation entirely. Catherine understood that she needed to address the underlying tensions with Camilla, not for the sake of the press but for the sake of the family. She had seen too many royal families torn apart by festering resentments, by conflicts that were allowed to grow in the shadows rather than being confronted in the light. She did not want that future for her children. So Catherine made a decision that surprised everyone, including her husband. She would visit Camilla. She would go to Clarence's house, sit down with the woman who had tried to sabotage her, and attempt to make peace. William was skeptical when she told him her plan. They were in their private quarters, the children already in bed, the evening quiet around them. William stood by the fireplace, his face reflecting the flickering flames as he listened to his wife explain her reasoning. "You know she won't appreciate it," he said carefully. "Camilla sees kindness as weakness. She always has. Going to her now, after what she's done, will only convince her that she has power over you." Catherine nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But, what is the alternative? We cannot avoid each other forever. We will be at the same family events, the same official functions, the same Christmas dinners for the rest of our lives. Would you rather we spend those years in silent warfare, pretending to smile while harboring hatred in our hearts?" William sighed. He knew his wife was right, even if he wished she were not. Catherine had always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and found common ground where others saw only division. It was one of the things he loved most about her, even when it frustrated him. "At least let me come with you," he offered. But Catherine shook her head. "No. This needs to be between us, woman to woman. If you come, it becomes about the succession, about who will be king and when. I want this to be personal. I want her to see that I am not her enemy." William reluctantly agreed, extracting a promise that Catherine would tell him everything that happened. He trusted his wife's judgment, even when he questioned her methods. She had a way of reading people that he sometimes envied, an emotional intelligence that allowed her to navigate situations that would have left him floundering. The next morning, Catherine requested a private meeting with Queen Camilla. The request was delivered through official channels, formal enough to respect protocol but warm enough to signal friendly intentions. Camilla received it with surprise and suspicion. She could not imagine what Catherine wanted, could not understand why the younger woman would voluntarily walk into what Camilla considered her territory. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon, at 3 o'clock in Camilla's private drawing room at Clarence's house. Catherine arrived exactly on time, dressed simply in a navy blue dress that managed to be both elegant and understated. She carried no entourage, no private secretary, no lady-in-waiting. She came alone, which was itself a statement. Camilla greeted her with the artificial warmth that had become her default when dealing with people she did not trust. She kissed Catherine on both cheeks, European style, and gestured for her to sit on one of the velvet sofas that filled the room. A maid brought tea, which Camilla poured herself, her movements precise and practiced. "This is unexpected," Camilla said as she handed Catherine a cup. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Catherine took a sip of her tea before responding, using the moment to gather her thoughts. She had rehearsed this conversation in her mind a dozen times, but now that she was here, the carefully prepared words seemed inadequate. So she decided to be direct. "I came because I believe we need to talk honestly with each other," she said. "Not as queen and princess, not as representatives of the crown, but as two women who are part of the same family and who will be part of the same family for many years to come." Camilla's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Wariness, perhaps, or curiosity. "Go on." Catherine set down her teacup and folded her hands in her lap. "I know you are unhappy about the tiara. I know you feel that you should be the one wearing it at the state banquet. And I want you to know that I understand those feelings. If the situation were reversed, I would probably feel the same way." This was not what Camilla had expected. She had anticipated defensiveness, justification, perhaps even an attempt to gloat subtly beneath a veneer of politeness. What she got instead was empathy, genuine and unforced. It threw her off balance. "The decision was not mine," Catherine continued. "I did not ask for this honor, and I would never have sought it if I knew it would cause you pain. But, once Charles made his decision, I could not refuse. To do so would have been to insult him, and I love him too much for that. Camilla listened, her face a mask of careful neutrality. Part of her wanted to believe Catherine, wanted to accept this olive branch being extended. But, another part, the part that had survived decades of public hatred and private disappointment, whispered warnings. This could be a trap. This could be manipulation dressed up as kindness. You say you understand my feelings, Camilla said slowly. But, how can you? You have never had to fight for your place. You have never had to endure what I have endured. You walked into this family on a wave of public adoration, the perfect princess come to save the monarchy. You cannot possibly know what it is like to be despised. The words were harsh, but Catherine did not flinch. She had expected this bitterness, had prepared herself for it. She knew that beneath Camilla's polished exterior lay years of accumulated pain, and she knew that pain did not disappear simply because circumstances changed. You are right, Catherine admitted. I have not endured what you have. The public has been kind to me in ways they were not kind to you. But that does not mean I have not faced challenges of my own. I was not born royal. I had to learn everything, had to earn my place in a world that was completely foreign to me. I made mistakes, many of them, though the public was generous enough to forgive them. She paused, considering how much to reveal. Then, she decided to take a risk. And there have been other challenges. Private ones. My illness, which you know about. But also times of doubt, times when I wondered if I was strong enough for this life. Times when the pressure felt unbearable and I wanted nothing more than to walk away from all of it. Camilla studied the younger woman with new interest. This vulnerability was unexpected. In all her years of observing Catherine, she had never seen her admit weakness. The Princess of Wales always seemed so composed, so unshakable. To hear her speak of doubt was almost shocking. We are more alike than you might think, Catherine continued. We are both women who love men who will wear the crown. We both have to find our place in a world that was not designed for us. We both have to smile when we want to scream and wave when we want to weep. The specifics of our struggles may be different, but the essence is the same. Camilla was quiet for a long moment. The afternoon sun was shifting, sending beams of golden light across the carpet between them. Outside, she could hear birds singing in the garden, oblivious to the drama unfolding within the house. Why are you telling me this? Camilla finally asked. What do you want from me? Catherine leaned forward, her eyes meeting Camilla's directly. I want peace. Not for the cameras or the public or even for Charles. I want peace for us, because life is too short and too precious to spend it in conflict. I want us to be able to sit at family dinners without tension crackling between us. I want our grandchildren, when they come, to see their grandmothers as allies rather than rivals. The mention of grandchildren touched something in Camilla that she had not expected to feel. She had grandchildren of her own from her first marriage, whom she loved dearly. The thought of royal grandchildren, of George and Charlotte and Louis growing up and having children of their own, stirred something in her heart. And the tiara? Camilla asked, her voice softer now than it had been. How do we move past that? Catherine smiled gently. The tiara is just a thing. A beautiful thing, yes, but still just an object. What matters is not who wears which piece of jewelry at which event. What matters is whether we can find a way to support each other, to lift each other up rather than tear each other down. The public watches us so closely, analyzes every interaction, every glance, every gesture. Imagine what it would mean to them if they saw us as friends, as partners in this strange royal life we both lead. It was a compelling vision, and Camilla found herself wanting to believe it was possible. But decades of experience had taught her to be cautious. She had trusted people before and been burned. She had opened her heart and had it broken. She was not sure she had it in her to be vulnerable again. I will think about what you have said, Camilla replied carefully. I cannot promise anything more than that. Catherine nodded, understanding that this was all she could expect from a first conversation. Rome was not built in a day, and neither was trust. She rose from the sofa, preparing to leave. "There is one more thing," she said as Camilla walked her to the door. "The state banquet. I know you have been planning your outfit with great care. I hope you will do me the honor of standing beside me when we greet the French president. It would mean a great deal to me if we could present a united front." Camilla was taken aback by the invitation. She had assumed that the seating arrangements and formal protocols would keep them largely separate during the event. The idea of standing beside Catherine, of sharing the spotlight rather than competing for it, was both appealing and terrifying. "I will consider it," she said again, and Catherine had to be content with that answer. After the Princess of Wales departed, Camilla sat alone in her drawing room for a long time. The tea grew cold on the table, untouched and forgotten. She replayed the conversation in her mind, analyzing every word, every gesture, looking for hidden meanings or manipulative intent. But, no matter how hard she looked, she could not find deception in what Catherine had said. Perhaps, Camilla thought, the younger woman was exactly what she appeared to be. Perhaps there was genuine kindness behind that carefully maintained facade. Perhaps, after all these years of suspicion and rivalry, there was an opportunity for something better. Or perhaps this was all an elaborate game, a strategy to disarm her so that Catherine could eventually push her aside completely. Camilla did not know, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. What she did know was that the state banquet was now 12 days away, and she had decisions to make. She could continue down the path she had started, leaking stories and playing political games, trying to undermine Catherine at every turn. Or she could take a different approach, one that required more courage but might yield greater rewards. That evening, Camilla joined Charles for dinner in their private dining room. The meal was simple, a roast chicken with vegetables from the estate gardens, nothing like the elaborate spreads they often endured at official functions. Charles seemed distracted, reading through papers between bites, his mind clearly on affairs of state. "Catherine came to see me today," Camilla said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Charles looked up, his interest immediately engaged. "Did she? What did she want?" Camilla recounted the conversation, or at least the parts of it she was willing to share. She left out some of the more personal confessions Catherine had made, feeling oddly protective of the younger woman's vulnerabilities. But she told Charles about the offer of peace, the vision of partnership that Catherine had painted. Charles listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful. When Camilla finished, he set down his fork and reached across the table to take her hand. "I know this has not been easy for you," he said quietly. "The tiara business, the press coverage, all of it. I know you feel overlooked, and I am sorry for that. It was never my intention to hurt you." Camilla blinked, surprised by this unexpected tenderness. Charles was not always demonstrative with his feelings, at least not in words. He showed love through actions, through small gestures and quiet consideration. To hear him apologize so directly was unusual and moving. "The decision about the tiara was mine," Charles continued. "I made it because I believed it was right for the family, for the monarchy. But I should have discussed it with you first. I should have prepared you rather than letting you find out through official channels. That was wrong of me, and I apologize." Camilla squeezed his hand, feeling tears prick at her eyes. These moments of genuine connection were rare between them now, lost in the endless demands of their positions. She had missed this, the intimacy of two people who truly knew and understood each other. "Catherine is remarkable," Charles said. "She has a gift for bringing people together, for seeing the best in others even when they struggle to see it in themselves. If she came to you offering peace, I hope you will consider accepting it. Not for my sake or for the public's sake, but for your own. Carrying anger is exhausting, my dear. I would hate to see you worn down by it." Camilla nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. She had been carrying anger for so long that she was not sure she knew how to put it down. It had become a part of her, a companion that whispered poison in her ear and kept her company during lonely nights. To release it would be to lose something familiar, even if that something was harmful. But perhaps it was time. Perhaps, after all these years, it was finally time to let go. The days that followed were filled with preparations for the state banquet. The palace machinery kicked into high gear, coordinating every detail of the elaborate event. Menus were finalized, seating arrangements were debated, security protocols were reviewed and revised. The French president's office sent daily communications about preferences and requirements. The whole thing was a logistical nightmare that somehow came together through the sheer force of institutional competence. Catherine spent her days reviewing etiquette protocols and practicing her French, which was already quite good but could always be improved. She met with historians who briefed her on the Grand Duchess Vladimir tiara, its history and significance. She learned that the tiara had been made in Russia in the late 19th century, commissioned by Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich for his wife. When the revolution came, the tiara was hidden and eventually smuggled out of the country by a British diplomat. Queen Mary purchased it in 1921, and it had been part of the royal collection ever since. Catherine found herself moved by the tiara's story, by its journey from Russian aristocracy through revolution and exile to its eventual home with the British royals. It was a survivor, this piece of jewelry, a symbol of resilience in the face of catastrophic change. Wearing it would be more than an honor. It would be a responsibility. Meanwhile, Camilla was making her own preparations. She had decided to follow Catherine's suggestion and stand beside her when greeting the French president. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but it felt significant. She instructed her staff to coordinate with Catherine's team on the logistics. She practiced her own French, which was serviceable if not fluent. She worked with her dressmaker on final adjustments to her emerald gown. But her most important preparation was internal. She spent hours in reflection, examining the jealousy and resentment that had driven her actions. She thought about her conversation with Catherine, about the offer of partnership and peace. She thought about what she wanted her legacy to be, how she wanted to be remembered when she was gone. Did she want to be remembered as the bitter queen who spent her final years feuding with her daughter-in-law? Or did she want to be remembered as a woman who grew, who learned, who found grace even when it was difficult? The answer, when she finally admitted it to herself, was clear. 10 days before the state banquet, Camilla did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She invited Catherine to tea at Clarence's house. Not for a tense confrontation or a strategic negotiation, but simply for tea. Two women sitting together, talking about their lives, their families, their hopes and fears. Catherine accepted immediately. She arrived the next afternoon with a small gift, a book about the gardens of Highgrove that she thought Camilla might enjoy. It was a thoughtful gesture that spoke to Catherine's attention to detail. She had remembered that Camilla loved gardens, that she found peace among flowers and growing things. Their conversation was lighter this time, less weighted with history and grievance. They talked about the children, about plans for Christmas, about books they had read and shows they had watched. They discovered shared interests they had never explored, hidden commonalities that years of distance had obscured. By the time Catherine left, something had shifted between them. The walls were not completely down, might never be completely down, but they were lower. There was an opening now, a possibility that had not existed before. As Catherine walked to her car, she turned back to wave at Camilla, who stood in the doorway watching her go. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not friendship, not yet. But perhaps the beginning of understanding. Perhaps the first tender shoots of something that might, with care and patience, grow into something beautiful. The state banquet was now 9 days away. And, for the first time, both women were looking forward to it. The week before the state banquet brought a flurry of activity that consumed every corner of Buckingham Palace. Florists arrived with thousands of roses flown in specially from France as a compliment to the visiting president. Kitchen staff worked around the clock preparing dishes that would showcase the finest of British cuisine while nodding respectfully to French culinary traditions. Silver was polished until it gleamed like mirrors, chandeliers were cleaned crystal by crystal, and every carpet was inspected for the slightest imperfection. King Charles oversaw much of this preparation personally, walking through the staterooms with his equerry, making notes about adjustments that needed to be made. He had always been particular about details, a trait that some found endearing and others found exhausting. But no one could deny that his attention to detail produced results. When Charles organized an event, it was always memorable. Catherine spent the early part of the week at Kensington Palace, balancing her preparation for the banquet with her regular duties as a mother and, as a working royal. She had 2 official engagements scheduled, a visit to a children's hospital and a meeting with representatives from one of her patronages. She fulfilled both with her characteristic warmth, seemingly unaffected by the pressure of the approaching event. But those closest to her knew that she was nervous. Not about the tiara itself or the public attention it would bring, but about the larger significance of the evening. This state banquet would be watched by people around the world. Every detail of her appearance, her behavior, her interactions with other members of the family would be analyzed and discussed. The pressure to be perfect was immense, and even Catherine, with all her experience, felt its weight. William noticed her anxiety during their private moments together. He would catch her staring into the distance, lost in thought, her mind clearly elsewhere. He did what he could to support her, taking over more of the childcare duties, arranging small surprises to make her smile, reminding her constantly of how proud he was of her. One evening, about a week before the banquet, they sat together in their private sitting room after the children had gone to bed. Catherine was curled up on the sofa with a book, though she had not turned a page in 10 minutes. William watched her from his armchair, concern evident in his expression. "Talk to me," he said quietly. "Tell me what is weighing on you." Catherine set down her book with a sigh. "It is everything," she admitted. "The banquet, the tiara, Camilla, the press coverage. I feel like I am walking a tightrope, and one wrong step will send me crashing down." William moved to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. "You have walked tightropes before and never fallen. You are stronger than you know." "But this is different," Catherine said. "This is not just about me. It is about the family, about the institution. If I make a mistake, it reflects on everyone. If the evening goes badly, people will blame Charles for choosing me, they will blame you for not reining me in, they will find some way to turn it into a scandal." William shook his head firmly. "You are catastrophizing. The evening will not go badly because you will not let it go badly. You have prepared, you have done everything right. You even made peace with Camilla, which is more than anyone expected." Catherine smiled slightly at the mention of her conversations with the Queen Consort. Those meetings had been genuinely encouraging. She had seen a side of Camilla that she suspected few people ever saw, a vulnerable woman beneath the confident exterior. It gave her hope that real friendship might be possible, even if it would take time to develop. "I just want to do Elizabeth proud," Catherine said softly. "She believed in me. She trusted me to carry on her legacy. What if I let her down?" William pulled her into an embrace, holding her close. "You could never let her down. She saw in you what everyone sees, a woman of grace and strength and compassion. You do not need to be perfect, Catherine. You just need to be yourself. That has always been enough." They sat together for a long time, finding comfort in each other's presence. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows, but inside their little cocoon, everything was peaceful. Catherine felt some of her anxiety ease, replaced by a quiet determination. William was right. She had prepared, she had done the work, and now she simply needed to trust herself. Meanwhile, at Clarence's house, Camilla was having a very different kind of evening. She was meeting with her personal assistant to review the final details of her appearance at the banquet. The emerald gown had arrived from the dressmaker that afternoon, and Camilla had tried it on to ensure the fit was perfect. It was even more beautiful than she had expected, the green fabric catching the light in ways that seemed almost magical. But her satisfaction with the gown was tempered by ongoing anxiety about her role in the evening. She had agreed to stand beside Catherine when greeting the French president, a decision that still felt uncomfortable even though she knew it was the right thing to do. She worried about how it would look, whether people would see it as genuine or forced, whether the press would find some way to twist it into another story about rivalry. Her personal assistant, a woman named Margaret who had been with her for 15 years, noticed her distress. Margaret had weathered many storms with Camilla and knew her moods intimately. "You are worried," Margaret observed as she helped Camilla out of the gown. More than usual. Camilla nodded, not bothering to deny it. There was no point in pretending with Margaret. I have made so many mistakes, she admitted. The newspaper leak, the scheming, trying to undermine Catherine. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was only making things worse. Margaret hung the gown carefully in its protective bag before responding. We all make mistakes, Your Majesty. What matters is what we do after we recognize them. And, from what I can see, you are trying to do better. It was a simple statement, but it meant a great deal to Camilla. She had spent so much of her life surrounded by people who told her what she wanted to hear, who flattered and fawned and never offered honest assessment. Margaret was different. Margaret told the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Do you think people can really change? Camilla asked, settling into a chair while Margaret began to organize jewelry options for the banquet. Or are we simply who we are, destined to repeat the same patterns forever? Margaret considered the question carefully before answering. I think change is possible, but it requires intention and effort. It does not happen by accident. You have to choose to be different every day, even when old habits try to pull you back. Camilla thought about this as Margaret showed her various brooches and necklaces that might complement the emerald gown. The older woman was right, of course. Change required conscious effort. It was not enough to simply wish to be different. She had to act differently, respond differently, think differently. The truth was that jealousy of Catherine had become almost second nature to Camilla over the years. It was easy to envy the younger woman, to resent her popularity and her seemingly effortless grace. Those feelings would not disappear overnight just because Camilla had decided to pursue peace. They would still arise, still whisper poison in her ear. The difference would be in how she chose to respond. I want to send Catherine something, Camilla said suddenly. A gift. Something personal that shows I am sincere about wanting a better relationship. Margaret looked surprised but pleased. What did you have in mind? Camilla thought for a moment. It needed to be meaningful but not extravagant. It needed to feel genuine rather than calculated. Then, an idea came to her. There is a brooch in my personal collection, she said. A small one, sapphires and diamonds, shaped like a butterfly. My grandmother gave it to me when I was a girl. She told me it represented transformation, becoming something new and beautiful. Margaret nodded, understanding immediately why this gift would be significant. Shall I have it packaged and delivered? Yes. Tomorrow morning. With a note in my own hand. Later that night, Camilla sat at her writing desk composing the note that would accompany the brooch. She went through several drafts, discarding each one as too formal or too casual or too something else she could not quite define. Finally, she settled on something simple. Dear Catherine, she wrote. This brooch belonged to my grandmother, who believed in the power of transformation. I give it to you now as a symbol of my hope that we can transform our relationship into something new. May we both emerge from this moment more beautiful than before. With warm regards, Camilla. She sealed the note and placed it with the brooch, which Margaret had already wrapped in tissue paper and placed in a velvet box. In the morning, it would be delivered to Kensington Palace. Catherine would receive it before lunch, and Camilla would wait anxiously to see how she responded. The gift arrived at Kensington Palace just after 11 the next morning. Catherine was in her study reviewing briefing documents about the French president when Eleanor brought it in. The velvet box was accompanied by an envelope bearing the Clarence House seal. Catherine opened the envelope first, reading Camilla's handwritten note with growing emotion. Then, she opened the box and saw the butterfly brooch, its sapphires glowing in the morning light. She sat holding it for a long moment, touched beyond words. This was not a calculated gesture. Camilla could have sent any number of expensive pieces that would have meant nothing. Instead, she had sent something deeply personal, something from her own past, something that carried emotional weight that no new purchase could match. Catherine called William immediately to tell him about the gift. His surprise was evident in his voice. That is remarkable, he said. I never thought Camilla capable of such a gesture. People can surprise us, Catherine replied, echoing something she had once heard Queen Elizabeth say. When we give them the chance to be better, sometimes they take it. She composed a reply to Camilla that afternoon, expressing her gratitude for the beautiful gift and what it represented. She promised to wear the brooch at a private family occasion, wanting to honor it in a way that felt personal rather than public. The exchange of letters and gifts was not witnessed by cameras or reported in newspapers. It existed only between the two women, a private milestone in a relationship that was slowly being rebuilt. The days continued to pass, each one bringing the state banquet closer. 6 days before the event, Catherine visited Buckingham Palace for a final fitting of the gown she would wear. It had been designed by a British designer she had worked with many times, someone who understood her style and her preferences. The dress was a pale blue that would complement the sapphires of the Vladimir tiara's pearl drops. It was elegant without being ostentatious, modern while still respecting tradition. The fitting took place in one of the private rooms of the palace, away from the chaos of banquet preparations. Catherine stood on a small platform while the designer and her assistants made final adjustments to the hem and the sleeves. The gown fit perfectly, moving with her as she walked and turned, never restricting her movement. King Charles stopped by briefly to check on the progress. He examined the gown with his practiced eye, nodding approvingly at the designer's work. "You will be magnificent," he told Catherine warmly. Elizabeth would be so proud. The mention of the late Queen brought tears to Catherine's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. She thought about the tiara she would soon wear, about the weight of history it carried, about all the occasions when Elizabeth had worn it while representing Britain to the world. "I hope to honor her memory," Catherine replied. "And to represent our family well." Charles took her hand and squeezed it gently. "You have already done both, my dear. You have already done both." After the fitting, Catherine took a walk through the palace gardens. It was a cold day, and she wrapped herself in a warm coat as she strolled along the familiar paths. She had walked these gardens many times over the years, in all seasons and all moods. Today, with the state banquet approaching and so much weighing on her mind, she found the peace she had come looking for. She thought about her journey to this moment. She remembered her first meeting with William at university, how nervous she had been, how certain that nothing would come of it. She remembered their long courtship, the years of waiting while William completed his military service, the constant attention from the press that had nearly broken them apart more than once. She remembered their wedding day, the sense of stepping into history, the knowledge that her life would never be private again. And she remembered the challenges that came after. The adjustment to royal life, which was far harder than she had anticipated. The pressure to produce heirs, which had come from all directions. The balancing act of being a mother while fulfilling public duties. The health crisis that had forced her to step back and re-evaluate everything she thought she knew about strength and vulnerability. Through it all, she had survived. More than survived, she had thrived. She had built a life that felt meaningful, work that made a difference, a family that filled her with joy. Whatever happened at the state banquet, whatever the press wrote or the public thought, nothing could take away what she had built. As she walked back toward the palace, Catherine felt a sense of calm settle over her. She was ready. Whatever the evening might bring, she was ready. 5 days before the banquet, William and Catherine made an official visit to a charity in London. It was a routine engagement, the kind they had done hundreds of times before. But something felt different about it. Perhaps it was the approaching banquet, perhaps it was the resolution of tensions with Camilla, perhaps it was simply a moment of clarity that sometimes comes without warning. As Catherine moved through the event, meeting staff and volunteers, listening to their stories, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. These people, who worked tirelessly to help others, who gave their time and energy without expectation of reward, they were the real heroes. Compared to their quiet dedication, all the drama over tiaras and royal rivalries seemed trivial, even embarrassing. She said as much to William on the drive back to Kensington Palace. He listened thoughtfully, as he always did when she shared her reflections. "You are right, of course," he agreed. "We get so caught up in the pageantry, in the symbols and ceremonies, that we sometimes forget what matters. The work is what matters. The people we serve are what matter." Catherine nodded, looking out the window at the London streets passing by. I want to remember that during the banquet. I want to remember that the tiara is just a tiara, that the dress is just a dress. What matters is representing our country well, making our guests feel welcome, serving the purpose for which the event exists. William reached over and took her hand. And you will. You always do. That evening, back at Kensington Palace, Catherine received a phone call that surprised her. It was from Camilla, calling directly rather than going through staff. I wanted to thank you, Camilla said without preamble. For your note about the brooch. It meant a great deal to me. Catherine smiled, touched by the unexpected call. The brooch meant a great deal to me. It was incredibly generous of you to share something so personal. There was a pause on the line, then, Camilla spoke again, her voice softer than Catherine had ever heard it. I have been thinking about our conversations. About what you said about wanting peace, about wanting us to support each other. I want you to know that I am committed to trying. It will not always be easy, and I cannot promise I will not make mistakes. But I want to try. Catherine felt her heart swell with something that felt very much like hope. That is all anyone can ask. And I make you the same promise. We will try together. They talked for a few more minutes about mundane matters, the weather, the children, plans for Christmas. It was the kind of conversation that friends might have, easy and comfortable. When they hung up, Catherine felt that something had truly changed between them. She shared the conversation with William later that night. He was surprised but pleased, hopeful that perhaps this fragile peace might hold. Miracles do happen, he said with a smile. Though I never thought I would see this particular one. Catherine laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Perhaps we are all capable of more than we think. Perhaps transformation really is possible. 3 days before the banquet, the Vladimir tiara was brought to Kensington Palace for Catherine to try on. It arrived in a secure case, accompanied by representatives from the royal collection and a jeweler who specialized in antique pieces. The ceremony of trying on the tiara was both practical and symbolic, ensuring that it fit properly while also marking the moment when Catherine formally took possession of this historic piece. The tiara was even more beautiful up close than Catherine had imagined. The diamonds sparkled with an inner fire, the pearl drops glowing softly in the light. She could feel the weight of it in her hands, substantial but not overwhelming. This was a piece that had been worn by queens and grand duchesses, that had survived revolution and war, that had witnessed history being made. With the help of the jeweler, Catherine carefully placed the tiara on her head. It settled into place perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw something she had not expected. She did not see a woman playing dress-up with borrowed finery. She saw a princess, a future queen, a woman who belonged exactly where she was. William was there for the fitting, watching from across the room. When Catherine turned to face him, wearing the tiara for the first time, his breath caught in his throat. She was radiant, transformed by the historic jewelry into something almost otherworldly. You are extraordinary, he whispered, coming to stand beside her. Truly extraordinary. Catherine met his eyes in the mirror, seeing the love and admiration reflected there. In that moment, all her anxiety about the banquet faded away. She was ready. She was more than ready. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The tiara was carefully removed and returned to its secure case. It would be kept at Kensington Palace until the night of the banquet, under constant guard. Catherine thanked the representatives from the royal collection and the jeweler for their help, her graciousness evident in every word. After they left, Catherine and William sat together in the quiet of their home, processing what had just happened. It felt right, Catherine said softly. Wearing the tiara, being part of that history. I cannot explain it, but it felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. William nodded, understanding completely. That is because you are. You have worked for this, earned this, grown into this. The tiara is not creating something new. It is recognizing what has always been true. 2 days before the banquet, final preparations reached a fever pitch. Catherine had a full day of briefings about protocol and expectations. She met with the palace's head of protocol, who walked her through every step of the evening from arrival to departure. She reviewed the seating chart, memorizing names and faces so she would not be caught off guard during the dinner. She practiced her French one more time with her language tutor, ensuring she would be able to converse naturally with the French delegation. That same day, Camilla was completing her own preparations at Clarence's house. Her emerald gown was hanging in her dressing room, her jewelry selected and ready. She had rehearsed the greeting ceremony multiple times, ensuring she knew exactly where to stand and what to do. But her mind was not entirely on the logistics. She was thinking about Catherine, about their conversations, about the unexpected direction their relationship had taken. A month ago, she would have been dreading the state banquet, viewing it as yet another occasion when she would be overshadowed by her more popular daughter-in-law. Now, she found herself looking forward to it. Not because she expected the spotlight, but because she anticipated the experience of standing beside Catherine as an ally rather than a rival. It was a strange feeling, this release from jealousy. Camilla had carried resentment for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be free of it. Now, tentatively, she was rediscovering that freedom. It was like taking a deep breath after years of shallow breathing, like seeing colors again after a long period of gray. She called Catherine that evening to wish her well. It was a brief call, just a few words of encouragement and support. But those few words carried weight that both women felt. "I will see you at the palace," Camilla said before hanging up. "We will face this together." Catherine smiled as she ended the call. Together. It was a word she had never expected to share with Camilla, and yet here they were. Life, it seemed, was full of surprises. One day before the banquet, both women rested. It was a deliberate choice, a recognition that the evening to come would require all their energy and focus. Catherine spent the day with her children, enjoying their company without the distraction of official duties. William was there too, making the most of this quiet family time before the demands of the state visit began. George, Charlotte, and Louis were excited about the banquet, even though they would not be attending. Catherine had described the preparations to them, the flowers and the food and the fancy clothes. Louis, ever curious, wanted to know if there would be chocolate cake. Catherine promised to save him a piece if there was. As night fell and the children went to bed, Catherine found herself standing at the window of her bedroom, looking out at the lights of London in the distance. Tomorrow, she would wear a tiara that had been worn by queens. Tomorrow, she would represent her country at one of the most important diplomatic events of the year. Tomorrow, everything she had worked for would be on display for the world to see. She thought about Queen Elizabeth, who had faced so many such evenings throughout her long reign. She thought about the late Queen's grace, her composure, her ability to make everyone she met feel special. Catherine hoped she could channel even a fraction of that spirit. William came to stand beside her, wrapping his arm around her waist. They stood together in silence, looking out at the city that would one day be theirs to serve. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. Catherine leaned into his embrace, feeling his warmth and strength. "Yes," she said. "I am ready." And she meant it. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she was ready. The morning of the state banquet dawned cold and clear over London. Frost sparkled on the ground, and the winter sun cast long shadows across the city streets. At Buckingham Palace, the final preparations were underway, the great machine of royal ceremony grinding into its highest gear. Catherine woke early, before the alarm, before William, before the house came alive with activity. She lay in bed for a few moments, looking at the ceiling, letting the reality of the day settle into her consciousness. Tonight, she would wear the Vladimir tiara. Tonight, she would stand before the world as a representative of everything the British monarchy stood for. Tonight, everything she had worked toward would be tested. She rose quietly, not wanting to wake William, and padded to the window. The gardens of Kensington Palace were silvered with frost, beautiful in their winter dormancy. A robin perched on a branch just outside the glass, its red breast a splash of color against the gray morning. Catherine smiled at the bird, remembering a superstition her grandmother had once told her. Robins, her grandmother said, were visits from loved ones who had passed. Whether that was true or not, Catherine chose to believe it. Perhaps Queen Elizabeth was watching over her today. Perhaps that little robin was a sign that she was not alone. The morning passed in a blur of preparation. Catherine had a light breakfast with the children.